This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes, celebrating 10 years of promoting excellence in music composition. Come experience the musical imaginations of AMP's 4 extraordinary 2024 laureates. The Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal Chorus and Maestro Andrew McGill give the world premiere of their prize-winning works for the AMP Gala concert on October 28th at Maison Symphonique in Montreal. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
Or 20 years from now, the price of condos is going to appreciate, or houses? Absolutely. We're involved in a business. It's called Ourboro. We're in the co-ownership of housing business. It was brought to my attention because we never owned a home. We never owned a home because we were poor, but also we never had the down payment. So
that's the voice of real estate developer and philanthropist Miles Nadal speaking earlier this year in Toronto to a group of Jewish real estate executives about Ourboro, one of his company's newest projects. It's a fractional real estate concept, and Nadal is betting he can make money while helping make the dream of owning a home a lot more affordable for young Canadians and new immigrants, helping them achieve the dream years sooner than they would be able to do on their own. Nadal's Peerage Capital private investment firm was one of the first backers of Ourboro when it launched. Others have come on board recently, including some banks, private lenders, Home Trust, and just a few weeks ago, the La Union's pension fund signed on too. Here's how it works. In Canada, where the average price of a home is now nearly $650,000, and in Toronto, especially where starter homes can run over $1 million, saving up for a $200,000 down payment to make a bid is beyond affordable for many people. Ourboro isn't a mortgage company. If you qualify, they will co-invest in your down payment, up to a maximum of $250,000, while you have to kick in some too, meaning you avoid the added cost of getting additional mortgage default insurance, and you can look for a house in a better neighborhood. Ourboro doesn't charge anything up front. You'll have to pay the mortgage and the closing costs yourself, but they will co-own the house with you as an equity partner. They'll also help you find a mortgage and a real estate agent, and with the annual maintenance and upkeep, you have to live in the house. And when the house eventually is sold, hopefully at a much higher price than your original value, then Ourboro takes its share of the profits based on the initial split when they invested in your down payment. As the Israeli-Canadian COO Eyal Rosenblum sees it, better to own part of the house than no house at all.
I will always say to everybody I talk to, if you can buy a property on your own, or if you have access to the bank of mom and dad, you should do that. Do not split your equity with us. But if you're stuck renting and you want to build equity, we've done the math 1,000 different ways. You're going to be better off with us over 10 years than you would be renting and trying to save yourself.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News made possible with the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granofsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
In Berlin, rumors are spreading.
Holocaust victims, their bodies are just dug up.
It's a shunda.
But the truth is even more unnerving.
Was your family in the Shoah?
Dude looks like he was in the Shoah.
As the world panics...
This is some ritual, bringing the dead back to life.
No, you said this wasn't illegal.
It isn't, I don't think.
One woman seeks the truth.
These are questions you can't answer.
And you're too afraid to even ask them.
Justice, a Holocaust zombie story. An original audio drama from the CJN in association with the Ashkenaz Foundation. Listen now at the cjn.ca/zombies or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Ourboro story is a timely one. It's one of several alternative solutions currently out there to the housing affordability problem in Canada. I first heard about Ourboro at that UJA Federation of Toronto real estate event in the spring, where Nadal was one of the keynote speakers. And while Ourboro's been active for just over 2 years, we thought it made sense to run the story now, on the eve of the Jewish festival of Sukkot, which begins Wednesday night, October 16th, where Jewish people erect temporary wooden booths outside of their synagogues and homes and eat in them and remember the huts which the ancient Israelites lived in during harvest time and also after the Exodus from Egypt. Since launch to date, Ourboro has co-invested in 160 home down payments. The company works mainly in Toronto, but it's expanded to London, Hamilton, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, and Ottawa. While some financial experts caution the concept has its risks, the Canadian government is betting on the Ourboro idea too, and in the last federal budget, they loaned Ourboro $5 million to help first-time homebuyers. Joining me now is Eyal Rosenblum, Ourboro's COO, the son of Israeli immigrants, to explain why the model fits with his own personal values of tikkun olam, or improving the world.
Thank you for having me.
We're speaking as housing has been on top of mind with the federal government, and many provincial and municipal governments are looking at ways to solve the housing problem for young people and new owners in Canada. So before we get into that down the road, I want to ask you if you could just give us a little bit of a background on how the idea came about that this is what you thought you could do as a startup to solve the problem.
Sure. So in 2019, I was actually approached by one of the co-founders of Ourboro. And he put it very simply to me, which is, right now, the average down payment needed to buy a home in the GTA is just over $200,000. And the average savings for the typical 30-something is around $50,000. So the question remained, where's the $150,000 going to come from to cover a down payment when it's so hard to save up money in Toronto, in the GTA, even if you make a great salary? And it was a question I understood deeply for myself. I saw that same issue come up for myself, for my friends, colleagues, family members. Everybody was dealing with this issue. And if you didn't have access to the bank of mom and dad, you were kind of stuck. So the co-founder of Ourboro, Norm Tasevsky, he reached out to me and he said, right now you can either own 0% of a home or you can own 100% of a home. Why isn't there some sort of solution that would allow somebody to own 50% of a home but get to enjoy the entire property? And that's really how Ourboro was born. It was this idea that, imagine two friends or two family members came together to buy a property. They each put in a portion of the down payment, and when the property was sold, they each got a portion of the proceeds. It's as simple as that. So the heart of the program and the heart of what we do at Ourboro is we help to solve the down payment gap, and we do that by investing directly into the property for a future share of the gains or losses when the property is sold.
So let's talk about your personal circumstances, because I think, if you don't mind sharing with our listeners, how did you solve the crisis when you wanted to start buying homes? When, I guess, you got married, or?
Yeah, great question. So it really started when we began thinking about having children, because I do believe that's really the moment where you want to settle and build roots for yourself. And we understood the housing market. We knew the challenges. We have friends in similar positions, friends who we've known our whole lives. We went to Jewish summer camp together.
Which one?
We went to Camp Shomria together. So we decided, let's actually pool our resources and let's find a property that we can both live in. So we took the Ourboro model, so to speak, but rather than co-buying with the company, we co-bought with our friends. We bought a triplex. They live on the top floor. We live on the main floor, and we share the basement and sometimes rent it out when needed. So that's been our model. And I would say, for those who are interested in the social aspect of living with community or with friends, what I did is an incredible experience, and I would choose it 10 times out of 10. But if it was strictly an economic choice that I was making to buy with friends just so I can afford a home, I probably would have gone with something like Ourboro, where I didn't have to deal with the complications and challenges of buying and living and sharing property with other people
that you were friends with, because it could go the wrong way too.
Exactly,
as it usually does.
It requires a significant foundation of trust. Yeah.
What ended up happening with that property? Is that where you still are?
It's where we still live. We brought our second child into the world just 4 months ago. And we have the world's best babysitters that live upstairs.
So back to the housing situation. When you came on board the company, who was the target market? Was it young people or was it for...
We made an intentional decision to open up access to the program to anybody who was effectively a first-time home buyer who was struggling to break into the market. That was our target. And what we found over time is that the people who that resonates the most with are growing families, millennials, effectively, who are in their 30s or early 40s, who are about to add a new addition to their lives, but they can no longer rent. They want to put down roots. And newcomers, folks who have moved to Canada, have become permanent residents or Canadian citizens, and really want to make Canada feel like home. And one of the ways they do that is by buying property.
I've had this house for 30 years. We're in our 60s and 70s, so empty nesting, and we're hanging on to it, right, into the equity until we move. But we would be the people that would be the bank of mom and dad. So how would it work for your clients? Why wouldn't they be able to get a down payment from the bank and a mortgage? And why would yours be the solution?
Great question. The way the rules work in Canada, and they're very strict compared to lots of other places in the world, but the way the rules work here is if you want to buy a property over $1 million, you are required to have 20% of the down payment that you have of your own money, your own capital. So effectively, a minimum of $200,000 that you're putting towards a down payment. It can't come as a loan. It can't come from the bank. It can be a gift. So if your parents were to gift you that money, you could use that for a down payment.
You can't put it on your credit card either.
Exactly. You can't put it on your credit card. You can't use any other kind of debt to service that. And the second part is you need a mortgage. So if you're putting in 20% of the value, the bank is going to lend you the other 80% effectively. And they want to make sure that their loan is as risk-free as possible, let's say. So effectively what we do is, for a lot of our buyers, if they only have $50,000 saved up, we'll put in the other $150,000 to get them to that 20% down payment that would allow them to go to the bank and get the mortgage they need to buy the house they want.
And no interest.
On our portion, there's no interest. It's simply us, just the same way as a home buyer, we're investing in the property. So if the property increases in value, we get a share of the appreciation. If the property decreases in value, we actually take our fair share of the losses as well.
So is this for long-term people? Like I just told you, we have our house 30 years. Because then you would get in 30 years, you'd be getting way more than they want to give you.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Ellen. So what we usually say to our home buyers when they come to us is, we're here to help you buy your starter home. We're here to help you break into the market. We've done the calculations. If the markets kind of continue as is, in 7 to 10 years, you will have built up enough equity by yourself to sell the property and buy your forever home without us. We want you to make us obsolete, basically.
So can you walk us through maybe some of the numbers so far? How many have you had, where, and how many have actually sold and moved on? And how many are still with you?
Yeah, it's quite new. We launched the program publicly in 2022. Since then, we've had quite a bit of demand, just over 2,000 applications come our way. From those applications, we have our first 2 sales happening this year. Since it's so fresh and so new, most people, we recommend them to hold on, for a longer period of time.
So what's in it for you guys besides a long wait until you see any money?
Ourboro itself isn't putting up the capital. We are effectively an investment manager. So investors who want exposure to single family real estate, they come to us and they say, we like this idea. We don't want to become landlords. They are really interested in the fact that our home buyers have the same goal as the investors, which is to see the property appreciate in value. Because if it appreciates for the homeowner, it appreciates for the investor. So investors, they come to us and say, if I have $5 million lying around and I want to invest in Toronto real estate or in Ontario real estate, rather than buying 5 properties, I can own small shares in hundreds of properties all across the GTA, all across Ontario. And not only will it be houses, it'll be condos, townhouses. It gives them diversified exposure to the market without them having to do all of the legwork of buying those properties themselves. And we charge them a fee. So our investors are charged a fee for us to manage those funds for them. And we've received part of our funding from the Government of Canada. We received part of our funding from institutional investors and part of our funding from high net worth individuals who really, really believe in providing others with the dream of homeownership and knowing that they're going to get a return in the end as well. They like the social impact.
If they default, let's say the people default, they can't make their mortgage payments, whatever. You guys get the house, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we want to try
the bank gets the house or the mortgage.
Yeah, so the way it works typically is if someone was to default on their mortgage, the bank would then issue some sort of power of sale. They would sell the property effectively on behalf of the homeowner and have to share the proceeds after they've taken back their loan. That's how it usually works. We try to avoid that. So we actually have a fund called our Homeowner Advance Fund. If one of our buyers is experiencing financial distress, they can access up to 3 months of mortgage payments with us. And for 45 days, it's interest-free. It's just, here is some cash that you need to help you get through a tough time. If you pay us back within 45 days, no interest. It's just, 2 partners helping each other out. If after the 45 days, they still are unable to pay that advance back, we would charge an interest component to that. And then when the property is sold, we would take a portion. But what that gives them is it gives them 3 months of time to get the property in order, to list the house themselves under their own terms without having to default on their mortgage.
It sounds like the old days. I'm talking about when, grandparents and great-grandparents first came on the ships, from Europe or Morocco, wherever, where the community sort of free loan society or the, benevolent group or Landsmannschaft, private societies would make private loans to help people, or grants even, to help young people get started and get a foothold in Canada. And the banks weren't involved. Why do you think this is coming into popularity again now?
There's a crisis. Like my parents, they're immigrants from Israel. They moved here in the late 70s, and they had it hard. My dad was driving a taxi, moving furniture. And they had to learn English. They had help though. Like you mentioned, people in the community came and supported them in certain ways. But they built a life for themselves here. And at some point, they were able to save up enough to buy a home. And the home values at that time, we're talking like $200,000, $300,000. Now we're looking at 1.2. The same property today, that property goes for $1.8 million. And that's a very short amount of time. And the truth is, incomes in Canada have remained relatively flat over the last 50 years in terms of real buying power, but the value of properties has gone up significantly. And the gap is getting wider and wider, and people simply cannot afford to buy on their own. That's where we come in.
The federal government's you said the federal government is helping one of your investments as one of your institutional investors, which I find fascinating. But was that new in this latest budget where they are going all in on trying to help people with housing?
This is actually part of a prior budget's allocation, but I think some of the work they're doing now is great. And I think it's clear that they've heard the anger that people are feeling, the frustration, the helplessness, and they're trying to do something about it. And they recognize the crisis for what it is. So they've done quite a few major changes. Most of them are on the supply side. I think there's a general recognition that right now, there's simply not enough houses. So they're trying to incentivize developers. They're trying to incentivize cities, municipalities in ways to allow it to make it easier for folks to actually build new inventory. That's work that we'll see the fruits of in 10, 15 years. It's a long way out. Today, we have a group of people who are going to miss out on their opportunity for homeownership. There's a requirement for demand-side solutions right now. And we believe that we fit into that kind of category. And the government of Canada has done other demand-side solutions as well. They've created the new first-time home buyer savings account. That's been very, very popular. And they've actually increased the amount of money that people can contribute towards that. They've increased the amortization period to 30 years for insured mortgages. So that allows people to lower their monthly costs and allows them to qualify for a bit of a larger mortgage. But that's only for new builds. It's only for properties that have not been built. It's not for resale properties. So I think for those who are in a situation like I was 3 years ago, there isn't something that's really clear that can be done. And while I love the first-time home buyer savings account and all of the ways that they're incentivizing people to save, you got to keep in mind, since 2020 to now, rent has increased by 20% in Canada. And so people are paying the price of that and aren't able to save as much as they were 5-10 years ago. And so we still think there's still a gap. And that down payment gap is still the thing that we think needs attention.
Besides you guys, is there other kinds of instruments that are doing this kind of same work that you are, or are you it in your field?
In the U.S., it's quite popular. So in the U.S., there's quite a few players who do this. Some municipalities in Canada do this on a city-by-city basis. Some universities will actually provide something like this to their professors so that they can live close to campus. We're the first of our kind to do this at a larger scale to a broader market.
I was speaking to my producer, executive producer, who is 30-something from Toronto, 2 kids, small kids, and they moved to Niagara Falls. And he asked me to ask you this. He said, ask him why that's not a bad thing. Even though as parents and grandparents, we want everybody to stay close to home, the Jewish community synagogues and the Jewish community centers and the schools and what have you, on the one hand, versus moving out to smaller communities where affordability is easier.
I think that's great, but I think that's it's a natural product of what we see. And I think it makes sense for people to do that and make those decisions for themselves. For me, what actually drew me in the first place to Ourboro was I was noticing that the people who make our city great, that make Toronto an amazing place to live and to work, a lot of them were leaving. And I was sad because I thought that those are the people that made Toronto a vibrant community. And what we wanted to do is say, for those who want to make it a priority to live close to where they work, or who want to make it a priority to stay in their neighborhood and community, we want to give them an option to do that.
Is there anything particularly Jewish that appeals to you about this model?
So 2 things. One is I grew up in a community and environment where we really focus on tikkun olam, tikkun adam. To me, that's the heart of how I see my Jewish culture, my Jewish faith be reflected in the world. So to me, that's number one. And if I'm doing that, even if it's serving a larger community, not just the Jewish community, it's tikkun olam, it's the world. It's always coming from that, my values as a Jewish person. Beyond that, I would say the way that's structured is creative. It's trying to find a solution where there isn't one. It's trying to make a little bit of something from nothing. And I think that's something that also relates to me as a Jewish person.
Is there anything else that we should know that the listeners should understand about why this is so new and something that they should think about?
So for context, over $10 billion last year was transferred from parents to children in Canada to buy homes. That's a large amount of money. And for those who don't have access to that, or who know people who don't have access to that kind of intergenerational wealth, what we want to do is help them so that their children can be the beneficiaries of the bank of mom and dad in the future.
Thanks for the education.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. If the Ourboro alternative is not for you, You can check out what's happening in British Columbia, where a Jewish entrepreneur has been matching strangers together to co-own property. It's called Coho BC, and our podcast producer, Zachary Judah Kaufman, interviewed the founder, Noam Dolgin, for The Daily a year ago. We put the link to that story in our show notes. If you're in the market to buy a house, we'd love to hear about your challenges or your kids' and grandkids' affordability issues. You can reach me at ebessner@thecjn.ca. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.